We've recently acquired this lovely example of a Singer 201K sewing machine. It's a 1958 model, and although the machine itself is in excellent working order, the case has suffered a little over the years, and it's definitely showing some signs of wear and tear, and is in need of a bit of attention. We're going to recover the case with some cotton curtain fabric. It's fairly hard wearing fabric, and it looks similar to what Singer would have used originally. Started by removing the two catches and the handle from the case. The catches are held in place by a large threaded ring on the back. I loosened these to start with a pair of long nose pliers before removing them. There's just the two screws that hold the handle in place. The next job is to remove the plastic trim which conceals the rough edges of the fabric. There's a single staple to remove to do this. The trim's then quite easily pulled out of its groove. Once this has been completed, you can start removing the fabric. This does tend to leave some of the backing and glue behind. To remove the remaining fabric, I used vinegar. I applied the vinegar with a brush and left it for around 15 minutes to soften. I then used a scraper to remove the residual glue and the fabric. Once all the glue had been removed, I gave the case a light sanding over. There are a few loose joints around the base of the case, so I glued and clamped these and left them overnight for the glue to dry. Now the case was nice and rigid and I was happy with the finish. The next step was to apply the replacement fabric. I was originally going to apply this with a spray-on adhesive, but when I tested it with the fabric, it was inclined to soak through and spoil the end result, so I eventually settled on using a PVA adhesive. I covered the two side panels first before applying the long strip that covers the top of the case and the ends of the case. Cut the fabric about 100 mm oversized to allow plenty of room for trimming later. You need to apply the PVA glue evenly over the whole panel before applying the fabric. It dries fairly quickly, so it needs to be done as quickly as possible. I used a wallpaper brush to smooth out the fabric and avoid any wrinkles or air bubbles. I then used a plastic scraper to push the fabric into the trim retaining slot around the edge of the case. Once the glue is dried, you can then run a sharp craft knife around the bottom of the trim slot to trim the excess fabric. When I was fitting the long strip that goes around the ends and the top of the case, I did this in 3 sections. I started by gluing the fabric to the top of the case. Then once this was completed, I glued it to the end panels. Fabric wrapped around the bottom of the end panels and is trimmed and glued into the recess inside the case. As with the side panels, trim the excess fabric by running a craft knife around the bottom of the trim groove. Once the glue has dried, you can then refit the plastic trim. It just pushes firmly back into its retaining groove. You may have to stretch it a little. Cut out the holes for the retaining catches and the handle and refit them. I cleaned all my fittings with a brasso before fitting them. And here's my completed project.